painting my way in to paint my way out, right here on The Creative Connection. Along with fishing as a second outdoor activity, I do a lot of walking, where I get a chance to see some of the more crafty things the neighbors are doing, like decorated mailboxes with unique floral arrangements. There's this one Victorian house I walk by on occasion that has a cleverly matched birdhouse in the yard, arranged so well, it's like a picture waiting to be taken. Whether it's winter, spring, summer, or fall, I always look at it, and usually wind up saying to myself, one of these days I'll do a painting of it, and for the sake of what it seems to represent, I'll call it a Victorian birdhouse. Victorian-style architecture lends itself quite well to the lines and colors of nature, although it probably has little to do with it. If you think it was named after Great Britain's Queen Victoria, who reigned in the latter part of the 19th century, you are correct. Actually, the Victorian style is a product of eclecticism, or the borrowing of a variety of styles and combining them. While not uniquely Victorian, Gothic Revival, Italianate, and Neoclassicism are styles associated with the 19th century due to the large number of examples that were erected during that period. Particularly during the reign of Queen Victoria, as the British Empire became firmly established, many architects immigrated to the United States at the start of their careers, when notable cities were being developed or rebuilt to include Albany, Boston, Chicago, and Detroit, on down through St. Louis, even to New Orleans and out west to San Francisco. The studio here is of Victorian persuasion, although not as intricate as the more ornate styles that High Victorian would suggest. During the time this place was rebuilt, the most unique thing I noticed was the way these houses were framed, from the foundation upward into the roof. In other words, each floor was interconnected with very long timbers. Maybe that's the reason why Dorothy's house in The Wizard of Oz flew off in one piece. So I guess we've hit on a note of familiarity with the title of a Victorian birdhouse, having a style with multiple exits, most appropriate for the seasonal arrival of the purple martins. To convey the influence of drawing on composition as being the mother of all art, support most likely will be found in any fashion you wish to pursue, working from the general to the specific. The relationship of parts and how we gather them into a framed composition is much like a roadmap that keeps us on the right track throughout. On the other hand, I believe you can get too many lines on a painting, to the extent of being messy, eventually being covered with paint anyway. After setting up a base for visual expression and painting starts, we begin to discover avenues of depth. Whether they be of color coordination, shape, or form, these things begin weighing upon us, and this is where we can really appreciate drawing, and the arrangement of first things first, whereby we may continue. Here, for example, I've decided to paint the tree limbs first, then cover them with masking tape, so I can easily paint in the background. And when progressing to the foreground, I can remove the tape from the limbs. But regarding the subject of drawing as being the mother of all art, I remember Jake Wells, my watercolor instructor, once telling the class about drawing tree limbs when he said, "One thing is for certain, the further you get out on the limb, the smaller it gets. And if I see any of you making limbs bigger at their ends, I'll flunk you." Creating the likeness of tree limbs isn't easy, and I still cringe at the possibility of making a mistake. Although I didn't flunk the class, I didn't become an expert on watercolor either. One thing to keep in mind, regardless of the media chosen, is not to overwork the paint too soon. Try to let dimensions roll in light to dark, emerge gradually. As the painting progresses, I'll make several attempts to expand on the areas of light and dark that I now simply cover. In other words, the places that are green, I'll add blue and yellow, maybe to the extreme of using colors not necessarily associated with tree leaves. The viney portion of the flowering plant seems to indicate violet and orange, emerging from new growth. A considerable amount of difference can be made with the proper use of light and dark by making certain areas of the painting more prominent. Naturally, objects that are closer to us would demand more detail. Here I'm making this ornamental hanger accessory more noticeable by simply using light and dark respectively. You've heard me before attest to the use of masking tape and how it can make a difference. Some of you may be wondering if there ever is a time I'd do without it. Initially, we have to keep in mind why we are using it. The main idea is to keep straight lines straight and curved lines curved, where the overall grouping of shapes can be kept separate. This makes things go a lot better when adding detail. Other materials can help define shapes. In the case of watercolor, we can paint on or drip rubber cement to let dry, paint over, then remove it, unveiling the white area so necessary to the final outcome of the technique of using transparent color, where white is not available. Sometimes it's an artist's prerogative to add something different, even though it's not in the flux of what is seen. If it makes a difference, go ahead. Here, in this case, I think there should be another batch of leaves hanging, while at the same time not allowing them to become viney like their predecessors. If nothing happens to improve the results, well, I'll just paint over it, let it be, or try something else. Indeed, part of the joy of painting. Regardless of any attempt to make a difference, so to speak, you do reach a point where it's best to simply leave it alone. After obtaining the specifics of the background, the parts begin to work together in value of light and dark, emerging with definition and identity. As the 21st century poet writes, "This dance from light to dark holds pleasure few have known, fulfillment yielding all of naught, like a treasure to bestow. This dance from light to dark awaits to be spelled out, revered in its third dimension, a tone to be announced. This dance from light to dark, in value, shape, and form, identity arises out, colors, language deployed. This dance from light to dark, sands of time eternal, in a moment's found embarked, this dance from light to dark." Now that the background has been well established, we can focus on the finish, with the different parts working together to achieve separation with value. It really makes it all worthwhile, especially now that it looks like the only thing left is the main structure, where shadows play an important role in achieving depth to the overall composition, along with texture in the roof from whiteout areas of light's intensity. Most of the time it's rather convenient to have a friend who drops by on occasion, offering a comment. The last time he saw the painting, he said, "Wow, looks like you've got a real bird's eye view going on there." Some time ago I made a statement to my wife regarding its composition to say, "Somehow the two birdhouses remind me of a knight in shining armor, made of plant floral with his trusty squire nearby." At any rate, the brilliance of color shows through as we step back to take a look, where in combination with value of light and dark, this painting should accent the living room quite well, the place in which it was meant to hang. To evoke a response is perhaps the greatest attribute of recognizing quality in design. For the most part, it's seen as a precursor to the creative process, where the individual may ask, what sort of response do I intend to achieve? Not necessarily what sort of response shall I leave? Unless you're the likes of Jackson Pollock, whose work by some was found to be without shape and form, lacking in the use of positive and negative space as we know it. In terms of design, the property of unity could be the common ground where shape and form reside, if for no other reason, to assist in the flow of our interpretation. As art history would indicate, Jackson Pollock was at the forefront of the abstract expressionistic movement, while controversy still exists regarding his downplay of shape and form. To consider design with its 7 properties, including balance, rhythm, harmony, texture, variety, value, and unity, shape and form would have to exist in order for design to be apparent, not to mention other elements such as color, line, and movement, all substituted with his unconventional technique. Though his paintings would not suffer from a variety of textures, it reminds me of a painting I did as a study of Pollock's work that would indicate design's elements out of place. It was planned that the framework of the canvas would be poorly tacked together, as if unimportant, yet suitable for a variety of textures to include ripped cardboard, sawdust painted over, conjoined to a scrap piece of canvas, nestled in an array of shape and form made of scrap wooden pieces. But the greatest thing about it was to insult its existence by painting this inner core drab pink, muddy orange, and polyester mint blue. Surprisingly, the painting does well, hanging here and there, but the response is never quite how it was intended. When people react to it, it is to question what it means. I might do well to reply, I have no idea. However, I guess we could describe it as Earth itself, with its muddy brown juices of life, along with this gray follicle of life absorbing its contents. All in all, there's a blue sky on the left, amid the rows of vegetation, and on the right is the extreme of red and yellow, suggesting a well-lit planet of life. Further still, it's important to note that over time, and because of the fact it was glued together rather poorly, it took on another attribute of becoming warped. And I suppose it could be fixed, but that could be its greatest feature. That's why I call it the warped painting. It was also during this time I did another painting. As I recall, it became one of the first of my ongoing innovation of dimensionalism, where everything in this painting becomes transparent. Overall, the painting represents a mystery behind pyramid power, as shown caught up in the transport of 3 beams of light into the minds of the 60s movement. In effect, there seems to be a mystery behind the painting as intended, where dimensionalism so painstakingly achieved simply became part of the transport, somewhat unnoticed. It's not easy being judgmental in reviewing Pollock's apparent greatness, when initially we may find his work lacking shape and form, absent in the use of negative and positive space, deliberate in his painting with drops spattered about, or in squeezing tubed squirts of paint, seeming haphazardly spread on the canvas, sometimes even on an unprepared canvas spread out on the floor, walking his way through it. He said it made him feel closer to his work. Yet strangely enough, even with his move away from easel painting and conventionality, his paintings possess all the properties of design. In effect, Pollock's story becomes a motivational factor in the next project to experiment with drops and smears of paint, where, in this case, shape and form is deliberately added, with spontaneity left at the forefront. The small boards I have glued onto the canvas here represent a variety of lines, with the element of movement indicated by the curved line with circles to follow that have been cut out of the canvas, specifically adding shape and form with the title in mind of Escape from Abstract Expressionism. I didn't think much about how I would proceed until the night before I began this work. It was in a dream that I could see the painting taking on the color of a buckskin orange, the lower right corner having strokes of blue, blending with the upper left corner having a haze of yellow. After that, it was anybody's guess at what would come next. But this was a sound beginning because it would supply a good base for the brightness of colors to follow. I had previously decided not to use white or black in the mixtures, as they would tone down the colors. If the colors needed to be brighter, I could thicken the paint, and if lighter, I could use more water to make it thinner. Sometimes in the process of refining our work, we discover how it speaks, indeed with a message fulfilling our intent to create as well as to respond. Nevertheless, if we were to take the response simply for an opinion at the moment, we could find all paintings having Pollock's tubes and drops of paint. In order to appreciate abstract expressionism, Like Jackson Pollock, we should realize the journey toward making a work of art is as important as the art itself. It's arguable that all artists are expressive, but the term expressionist equates to a more artistic style, in which the artist seeks to depict not objective reality, but subjective emotions and responses that objects and events arouse within a person. This painting begins well underway, as I had to refocus my attention on specifics, not so spontaneous as the previous painting, but rather subjective, not to show elaborate detail in a room full of instruments and accessories, yet indicating a sound recording or a session had taken place. Blankets strewn about, used as sound baffles, would simply lend their color without crevices or wrinkles, where, as to that matter, any details other than their color design composition. Headphones hanging on the back of a chair would not be so mechanically elaborate as with the instruments like the guitar and piano. The microphone with guitar picks and harmonicas would be of simple animation and nothing more, except indicated in the brightness of their color. Perhaps the greatest character regarding its composition is its perspective. At the time I drew it out, it took 2 or 3 days. Some of the times I would draw standing up, sometimes sitting, drawing from various directions. Other times I would draw from my imagination. So in effect you could say there is no perspective at all, considering that when viewing this painting, you are presumably standing directly in front. This is not to downplay perspective, but to bring substance to the painting's subjective nature. I made a statement that the painting would take on its full effect when it revealed where the spectator would be standing, which came about soon after I began painting the Victorian-style blue table that came from the Peddler's Corner collection. This table just simply stood out as a possible auxiliary table that I would someday fix up as an antique, with a color close to the blue I selected here, but that hasn't happened yet. I still find the table hauntingly interesting. But the painting's final true perspective came through just as I thought, by the time the checkered floor was being completed. I was pleased at how something could be so subjective and turn out so well to convey the story of the session that had just taken place, and the musicians are on break. During the time I was painting the guitar strings, I reached out to remove a piece of tape, and for a moment I thought I had put my finger through the strings into the sound hole. The same thing happened when painting the ivory keys of the piano. I expected to hear a note played from the key I accidentally hit. One time I forgot the picks weren't real and reached to pick them up before moving the painting. William Seitz, an American art historian, once said, "Abstract expressionists value expression over perfection, vitality over finish, fluctuation over repose, the unknown over the known, the veiled over the clear, the individual over society, and the inner over the outer." To that statement, I would say it's easier sitting in the chair of a critic than the seat of a judge. As the painting comes about with its title already established, simply called The Session, I had decided where this painting, along with the previous one, would hang. In our family room, there's this bare brick wall that up until now supported an area occupied by a large Franklin stove vented through the ceiling. With the stove gone, the wall looked cold compared to the warmth of the room and its surroundings. Since this was a large wall, I had to make both these paintings larger than I normally would, which in effect has been a lesson well learned, as both these paintings have taken me away from the easel. Sometimes we may have to consider the fact our creations don't always turn out as they're planned, which is not any reason to give up by any means, but to continue the endeavor. This is the very nature of spontaneity, where we take hold and adapt our way through, such as our connection with the musical arrangements selected for the show's conclusion. It was one of a resurrecting type, where the composition began as a result of a current event, whose lyrics never came about, but the melody remained strong, as if to be used at another time under a different circumstance. It had a skip-along type of melody that seemed to suggest the right kind of flavor to showcase these paintings, definitely associated with the convergence of style, so familiar to Expressionism. So until next time, I'll see you next time.